what we will speak about today, I have a quick agenda. So we will have an introduction about one slide about me, the expectation, because as you may know, we will not be able to cover everything of CSS or every detail of SAS. After we will have a focus on CSS and preprocessor and SASS. And at the end, I have usually in my presentation, I have a section called useful link. I feel that this is a very important section because it's a list of links that I gathered during my front-end experience and during my work. And of course, some of them, they are really, really useful. And me too, it's difficult, as you know, as a developer or not developer or coming in developer, to find the right tool and the right link at the right moment. That's why for me, I think it's something that can stay with you during your learning CSS. As Dimitri already told you, I'm Aldo Ferrari, I'm in Switzerland. I work with Europe and of course, as all of you, with the different offshore of Tata. We are in Nyon. It's a village between Geneva and Lausanne, and we specialize in user interface. So all the development that is related to an interface. That's why my session is more related to a technology of interfaces like CSS or HTML and so on. I worked in Ireland and in Italy, and of course from the accent you can say that I'm Italian. I already gave a couple of presentations for TCS Europe around similar subject. I suggest you to have a look. We did a video that you can have you can have after the presentation the link. As you can see, I did a different presentation like introducing framework and tool, and also already something on CSS similar to the one of today. What's the expectation? So, as I said, today we will not have the time to go in detail on everything. And of course, I cannot teach you all the development on CSS. But what's the goal today is to give you the right tool and the right information, the basic one, or the one that usually developer miss, or I missed also at the very beginning. And with this information, you will be able, with your skill and with the passion, of course, to learn more CSS. You will be able, of course, to become an expert, if you want, in CSS, and knowing what is a preprocessor and how you use SASS. Let's start immediately with the basic knowledge. There are, I call it, 3 friends that many of you for sure will already know it, but I found in my experience that even experienced developer that they didn't develop, of course, front-end technology, but maybe they are focused on back-end technology, database, and so on. Maybe they missed these 3 tools that are really a key for debugging, for learning from already existing website. Like the first tool is the simple F12. When you are on a website, if you use Google Chrome or Firefox, the example you see in the screen is from Google Chrome. You go on any web page and you press the button F12, you will have a tool that is Chrome debug, where you will have a lot of inside tool to debug and to control your code. As you can see from your screen, on your top of the print screen, you have the page. You have the extension open. This is something that you don't have to install. It's already in the browser. And you can see all the different tags, and especially on your right, you can see the styles. So these are the styles that are used in the web page, specifically in the body element of the page. And on the right of the slide, you can see that there is a square. You can edit live the different properties of CSS. And this is very important because if you have a website, you have a small bug, or you want to see what will look like with a black background, for example, you just go on the browser, F12, you change the color and you see immediately the effect. Of course, it's a debugging tool. If you will need to apply this background color, you will need to code it in your code. And very useful also is the computed. That means you see exactly which CSS for the different tag that you selected is used. And you can deep down, drill down and see which CSS uses the specific font, the specific class. This is very useful. For example, if you have a huge application like, I don't know, SharePoint or a CMS, Control Management System, and you have 20,000 lines that you didn't wrote, and you need to know where the line height or the color was set to gray, for example. And as many of you already know, you have another button, top left, that will help you to debug for responsive. And we speak about responsive also briefly, because the basic responsiveness of a website can be done via CSS, specifically with media query. We will see after. The second tool, it's an extension that you have to install. I will provide you all the link in the presentation. And this is a very useful extension, as you can see from your screen. You can, for example, code your CSS. Maybe you don't want to reload the page because you have a lot of backend data to load or something, or a server on your machine. So you have this tool that can let you quickly reload the linked style sheet. You can remove all the style sheet to see what looks like the page, and so on. It's a bit more advanced debugger. And the third tool is not in reality a tool like a software or an extension. It's more of a website that it's called caniuse.com. It's a website that focuses on all the front end, we can say, tag and tool and parameters that you can use in any web project. For example, some properties of HTML5. But in that case, I provide you the link to the CSS different properties. What does it mean? You are not sure if transparent or a background properties or an opacity, it will work on your project because you use Opera or you use Samsung Internet and so on. So the solution is that you go on this caniuse.com, you type the name of your properties, and they will tell you exactly where it works and all the comparison. And it's very important because if you are learning CSS, with my links that I will provide and with the slide that we present today, you will be able to deep down in a specific class. For example, on the screen you see that the grid layout, the famous grid that most of the websites use now to have a responsiveness with different columns, it's supported on Explorer 11 with some specific issue, if you can say, and so the website will tell you the link, how to solve it, and so on. So you will have a lot of detail on each element. Now let's start precisely with CSS. What is CSS? CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet. CSS mainly, to explain it quickly, it is the dress of a website. It's what the website looks like. As you may know, a website mainly it's composed by three technology. If we take apart all the language like PHP, Java, and so on. So mainly a web page, it's done via HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. HTML, as you know, is the content, is the tag that create and structure the content. JavaScript, the more and more can style the page if you want, but basically it's for functionality. And CSS, it will style your page, so the look and feel. Let's see an example, and also keep in mind that CSS is not only the color, for example, or the size of an element. Today CSS is even more. It's like the icon, the typography, the structure of the page, as we said, the responsiveness of the page, and also it's going more and more further, the animation also. You will see in few slides the future of CSS about animation. Let's have a look. What will be your life every day, navigating like LinkedIn or a newspaper online without a CSS? Let's have a look on your screen and you see a LinkedIn page. If we remove the CSS, keeping all the JavaScript functionality, all the data from the backend and so on, this is the look of the page. So you still have the content, you still know the name of the person, the description, you have the link to the detail, but you don't have the look and feel, okay? And you don't have also small animation, icon, typography and so on. Another quick example is on a newspaper. It's very famous because it was one of the first to use the responsive properties of CSS called media queries. It's the New York Times. And without the CSS, that's the look that you have on the New York Times. As you may see, you have the basic button, link, list, images and so on, but they are not styled. So to well understand and well code CSS, it's important to know the history and especially how CSS works. CSS is a bit different from a jQuery or a library. So CSS is based on a consortium that many of you will know, is W3C, that will define some proposition, it will propose some rule for the style, for CSS. It started, if I'm not wrong, in 1994 or 97 in Switzerland, on the same team of the, we can say, inventor of the web. And the need was to style the content of a page. Still today, the process is the same. So W3C proposed some new properties or tools. For example, they proposed a couple of years ago the grid layout, what we call the structure of the page in column, okay? And was only proposed, released only in September 2017. At this point, no one will guarantee to us, developer, that these properties approved by the consortium will be used. Why? Because the browsers are mostly private, except Mozilla, that I put a small flash on the presentation. Mozilla usually, because it's a foundation and it's linked tightly with the W3C. Some of the people that write the W3C are professors of MIT also, that are linked to the foundation of Firefox, sorry. It's important to know that because if you want to test something new, a new functionality, 99% of the time you will find it firstly on Firefox, after usually on browser like Chrome and so on. Each browser, it's important to know, they decide what properties or module acquire and what to use or redefine. Why I say this one? It's important to know this information because CSS it's a bunch of modules, okay? So the W3C consortium divided in module depending on the complexity, on the targeting and so on. Some of them, they are there since 1997, like CSS1, like as you may know, the font size or the text properties to make a text smaller or bigger. Everyone knows is there since the beginning. After, the consortium decided to add other functionalities like CSS2, like media type, that what we call media query also in the future, and they evolved to CSS3. At the moment of CSS3, it's important to know there will be no CSS4. To be precise, each module, as you can see, the grid layout on the bottom of the round, and the other module will evolve by their own they will have their own life, we can say. So in the future we could have the grid layout version 4, version 5, but we could still have the CSS3 for colors and so on. It's important to know because this concept will let you understand better why some properties is working on some browser and some other is not working. And also in few slides we will see what we call auto prefix. So each browser, because it's a company, decide to get the grid layout, for example, and say we want the grid layout with a different definition for our browser. And we as a developer, we can only support or propose new functionality on the web, on W3C, but we cannot change the browser interpretation of CSS. What CSS, as I already mentioned, can do in a bit of more detail. So each of these elements, we can say it is a word of each one. So you can spend months doing only typography with CSS. You can spend months. There are people that do thesis, doctoral thesis, only on specific structuring, flexbox, animation, and so on. But it's good for you to know that you have these elements that are based on CSS properties or parameter or classes. So let's just briefly have a look. So we have the styles and the typography that are usually come from CSS2, like as I said, color, font, font size. We have the responsiveness done with the media queries. We have the structuring of the page. The more and more the focus is CSS to have grid layout. Before the grid layout we had flexbox that now since September or October 2017 it's fully compatible with the latest browsers. That means that's the point I said. Why they are compatible? Because Explorer decided in October 2017 to adopt the full package of Flex, but before was working on almost all the browsers and no one had the control. That's why the tool I mentioned, like can I use and so on. You see, everything is linked. And you can have animation. Usually when your browser, mobile browser, when you have a menu opening on the left, on the right, when you have a button that is blinking or moving a bit, and even when you see animation of square or round moving in 3D or fake 3D, if you can say, this is part of CSS. So you can have animation and transition with CSS, and the more and more the W3C consortium and the browser are pushing further. So in the future, some sort of animation like fade in, fade out that we use with JavaScript today could be done directly with CSS. After you have also icon and web font. This is important because at the very beginning we had only few fonts and we had to rely on font of the browser. As you know, the native font, for example on Macintosh you have Helvetica, that you don't have as a native on Windows. With CSS you can define your own font. Could be a specific font for a company or could be a font open source that you get from Google Font. But you can embed it in your website with CSS, with font family and the font tag. And this is very important because as you saw in the New York Times example, you can have different fonts depending on the browser, depending on the size of your application, depending on the user. So it's very important, CSS, also for accessibility, but this is another topic. You can manipulate images, and this is very, very important, especially in the research field of MIT for CSS development. The images today, as you may know, they are the more and more difficult to manage because of the responsiveness, because you are on mobile, because you are on a desktop browser. So CSS is pushing further with the proposed class for images to detect the responsiveness and choose the right images. It's not yet released and not yet adopted, of course, but it's something coming. What you can do today, it's already working with the manipulation of images. That means you can have a black and white images or a color images with no saturation, and you can saturate the images with CSS. Why? Because usually the images without some specific filter it's smaller as a size. And if you have 100 images, you can save a couple of mega, and you apply the same filter with pure CSS that has almost no impact on the size. It's only one line. And you have shapes. Shapes, it's something that push further the CSS to create logo, for example. So there are some logo that were recreated only with shape, like round, square, triangle, and so on. And this shape also, we can say it's connected to the new way of coding the shape and the images via SVG. But this is also another topic that is very large, but just for you to know this as an input. So it's important, very important to know that CSS is so powerful, because there is the misconception that usually it's just the color, and usually people don't even think to animate, do font, do icon, like the small icon that you see on everywhere with CSS. It's important also to know, the next slide, to know how we use CSS in your daily basis project. So the CSS can be used in inline style or in internal CSS or external CSS. Of course, I suggest everyone to use external CSS, because inline style, as you can see from the example, you can style a subtitle with your declaration, and you can make it red, blue, and so on. But if you have two subtitle in one page and you have 10 pages, you will have to recode it for every page and so on. You get the point. Internal CSS is the declaration in the head of the page, where you declare all your CSS. You write it everyone. It's a bit better, if you can say. It's better than inline style, but not enough, because if you still have 10 pages, you have to duplicate the CSS for all the 10 pages. So how we use external the CSS with external? So we create a CSS external in a folder, and we link in the head of the page through this linker reference. And of course, you can also specify your CSS is used for screen or is used for print, and the more and more there are different media that you can have a look online. If you think now about external CSS, you have one CSS that is your CSS of the application, but you could have the need of having more CSS for different page, or just divide the CSS in multiple blocks, because you have a huge application, you want a CSS for the table, a CSS for the menu, a CSS for the footer. That's where the need of preprocessor and Sass is coming in, and that's why today we will just talk a bit about Sass also. Important to know, this is very important, it's something that if you start to code or debug an application in CSS, most of the time you get mad and you don't understand why you are changing in the debugger on your application a background color or a color, something very simple, and it's not changing, and you are writing it correctly. Because CSS has a kind of, we say, priorities. If you have the same definition of color, for example, on an ID, it has the priority on the same definition of the color of one classes or on one attribute. Example, if I have an H1, I style it with the color red, for example, and after I use an ID for the same style with color blue. The color blue will be not applied because the priority is to the inline style, and so on, you know, with the other, the priority, the specificity that you have on your screen. And this is very important, because you know that you are working on a classes or a pseudo classes, you will see after what it is, and it's not changing, maybe there is an ID, or maybe someone coded an inline style. You see, you already are a bit less lost than before. As we mentioned, autoprefix, what is simply and briefly, it's a prefix, as you can see, WebKit, MS, WebKit Flex, that each browser could decide to implement for some technical reason, for marketing reason, whatever. So some properties, for example, on your screen, display, is not enough to write display flex, because it will work only on Firefox, Chrome and Opera. If you want it to work on specific Explorer 10, you have to write the same definition display with auto prefix. It's important, this concept, because it's something that you can automate, if you can say, and you can use a function to auto prefix using Sass, something that you will see in few minutes. And let's finish on what into CSS. Now that you know how to use it, you know the history, and you know why things happen in CSS, you need to know what's inside. So what's exactly the list of classes and pseudo and element that you can use. So there are a lot. I will give you the link that you have in the presentation, of course, but I want just to give you a quick overview. So we have pseudo classes. For example, some of them you already know, like hover, like focus, but there are other, like first child, like selection. For example, I just say it one, otherwise we can spend hours only on this topic. I suggest you to go on the website that is linked in the presentation and deep down and have a look on this different one. But just to give an example, selection is just a pseudo classes that lets you define what's the color of the web page when someone selects the text, just to give you an idea. We have properties. As you may know, properties, there are a lot of them. For example, the standard one that you may know, background or border, but you have also animation properties, you know, to animate something, to animate a background, to animate a border. You can animate almost all properties, okay, through the animation properties. Sound like tricky to say, but it's like that. You have function also. The more and more CSS, it's trying to implement functionality that we can find in Sass or in preprocessor. For example, function, variables is something that will come. Some of them, they are already there. And you can see some of them, they are easily to understand, to rotate something, for example, on the axis X, Y, Z, and so on. And you have also data type. This one are all the data type that you can have. They are all on your screen. They are not much. And this data type is what you see when you have an input, okay? And you put the data type color, for example, top left of your screen. What you will have, you will not have an input as a text, but you will have an input as choosing a color, you know, a wheel to choose a color. For example, the common one that you use, like file, okay? And at the end, and to speak about the future, my last slide for CSS, what's the end? It's a new concept. It's a concept, it's a mix of function and property and pseudo classes closed by a single word. For example, as you can see from your screen, you have Flexbox, as I told you, can be used today on all browsers, and the definition is flex. You will have in the future the grid, that is an evolution of the Flexbox, and probably will be called grid space, and you have the definition. And you have media queries that you already have. So what's the future and where you could focus on CSS? So CSS, as I told you, it's going the more and more through animation power usefulness, if we can say like that. Wireframing, for example, you could think about doing a simple wireframe without a designer. Of course, will be more a wireframe than a prototype. Of course, if you need the prototype nice and so on, you can have a Photoshop designer. At the very last, but not least, you can customize and create a framework. One example on all is Bootstrap, that as you see the latest version, the more and more is detached by JavaScript and it's pure CSS, including also Sass. And of course, CSS, it's the consortium of CSS. It's talking about import, including extend, including variable, something that is missing, that today it's something that is covered by Sass. So this is everything that we can say in 20 minutes about CSS, because I want you to give you some information about preprocessor and specifically SASS, SASS. As you saw, some of the functionality that we have today are not yet implemented in CSS, but we as a developer, the more and more we need to structure our code. We need multiple CSS that are compiled together to create a lighter CSS and a specific one, and for sure we need something that can be customizable and can evolve in the future, and I can pass it to a new developer. Okay, so today, if without Sass, imagine to have all the CSS of an application and I have to pass it to a colleague, or I have a lot of comment, or I have a session to instruct my colleague specifically what to touch, what not to touch, what is the priority on the ID and so on, it will be too difficult. So what Sass is a language, it's part of a preprocessor family. We don't have, of course, only SASS, we have also less, stylus and other, but the goal today for me and for you, it's to understand that it's important to have one preprocessor. Could be less, could be stylus. We suggest Sass for the reason we will see, but it's important because of the functionality we will see in a few slides, and it's important because you could have what is missing today from CSS, like variable, import, extend, and so on. Because it's a pre-compiled language, you need a compiler. So you need a way to transform your Sass file or SCSS file into CSS.css. We have few options. The easiest one for a techie guy, like a developer like us, is to use node and a module node Sass. So with the command line you compile or you automate the compilation. You can go further with npm, gulp, grunt and so on, or you can have developer software. Some software like Atom, PHP Storm, they already have a button or they already have something inside included in the software that compile automatically Sass, as they do today for Markdown. Or you can have tools like tiny local server like Preproc, or even online tool. If you just want to play with Sass and try something today, you just go online on Sassmeister. It's an online compiler. So Sass started in 2007, and why we decide to use Sass? Mainly because it's becoming a standard. It's like the choice between jQuery and another library. If you want to start something, you go with the better documented, the plugin or the tool that has the largest community, and maybe the one that is already implemented by large frameworks. That's the main reason. But as I said, it's important to understand that you are not forced to use Sass. The goal is to use a preprocessor. Okay? Let's have a quick look and one example for each of what's the key element of Sass. Sass is a language. Of course, today we cannot learn a full language, okay? But I can give you few examples that I hope will get you interested in it. So key elements are like variables. Variables is just easy as it is written. You can have a variable for a font size, for a color, and you can use the variable in all your different Sass file. Just a precision, Sass file, SASS, it's the extension also of the file. You could have also .scss with the C instead of an A. The only difference is the way you type it. For example, what you see on your screen is Sass. If I have to write it in SCSS, it's just the way you type the code. It's not the functionality, it's not the code that change. It's part of Sass. It's just that I don't use the bracket, I don't use the dot comma, and it's space sensitive. Continuing, we can have nesting. Nesting is very important. If you start to code in CSS, the more you code, the more you will see that you have to write multiple times the same parent element. For example, you have a list in ULLI and you want to give specific color to all the link inside, and your list is 10 of 10 elements, just to say. In specific normal CSS, as you can see the compilation on the bottom, you will have to write it everything manually. Okay, so you will have to duplicate ULLE, put a new class for the specific link, and so on. With nesting, you can nest almost with any limit inside the different tag or the different properties or the different classes. Okay, you have also the mixing. Mixing is very important. It's what in other languages can be called function, but to don't misunderstand, we have also Sass function, that is another thing we have in the next slide. Mixing is something that you create. It's a rule that you can create, and the good example is the auto prefix. That's why I spoke about auto prefix. You can imagine you have your own mixing called auto prefix with the properties that you want to make auto prefix. Okay, so instead of rewriting all the time the same bunch of properties or changes or element, you can use it as a function. We can say as a standard code function, and you can include the mixing as a function, as you can see bordered, and you can pass the parameter. You can pass multiple parameter. Okay, so you can imagine mixing. It's very well used for gradient that has a lot of properties to pass, and specifically gradient need at least 3 auto prefix. Okay, so you have the 3 auto prefix, the different 4 properties for gradient if you want top, left, right, blue, and so on, rounded, and you have it only once in a mixing called gradient, and you pass the properties, and you can use it in all the project. And we have function. Function, you don't misunderstand. A function is just an operator, if we can say. Sass call it function. Probably they should rename it in operator to be easiest to understand. It's something that you can use on an element or a variable. For example, imagine that you have a project for a client that the brand color is green, and you want to have a rollover in a slight lighter green. Okay, but you don't know the color or you don't have it. So you get your variable of the color, that is the variable for the main color of the client. You put it in the color of the operator, as you can see on the third line, lighten, with an amount in percentage of how light you want it. And automatically the code will calculate what's the color and will compile the proper color for you in the CSS. It's very important because using a mix between function, operator, and mixing, variable, operator, and mixing, you can really do your own, if we can say, framework, your own bootstrap for each application very easily. And of course, we have something very useful, that is the extend. The extend is the possibility to extend an already existing class. For example, you have the class, the properties class, the properties margin defined for the class block, and you want to reuse exactly the same for the P, the UL. A good example is when you want to extend a new button in your project, but you don't want to re-copy and paste or re-get all the properties of the button, for example, rounded corner, background color, but you just want to change one of the properties. And extend come in your help. And of course, you have different operator like if, else statement and loop. Imagine to do a list. You want a list with different colors starting from the top till the bottom. You do a loop. Or you want something changing because of the size of your responsive website, or because you have if the color is lighter than something. For accessibility, you want a black or a white and so on. It's very useful. It's very useful, especially for accessibility use. And of course, the last but the more important is the import. That's the way you import your different CSS or Sass or SCSS. You can have one file called myglobal.sass. Inside you have what you see on your screen. That means you are importing all the CSS or Sass that you have in the folder library, plus the specific mixing SCSS, plus an external CSS called reset.css. This is very important, and this is why my last slide, it's about the approach to preprocessing. Because of all these properties, you can do in two ways. Starting from scratch, you start your project from scratch, you do your folder with different SASS, and you have your variable file, mixing file, function to your own, and you start to create your own project. But the good things, because of the properties that we saw, the import functionalities, you can get a project that you already have. You already did the CSS, you don't want to destructure everything, but you can do it step by step. So you can get your project, get your CSS, include your CSS in your Sass, and do nothing. Of course, it's not useful because you're not changing anything, okay? You are just changing the CSS and recompiling as it is. But that means that in the future you can deconstruct block by block. For example, today I do my variable and my structure for the button. So in the future, my colleague can extend the button and they know exactly where they are and so on. So to finish, just to mention, Sass has all the different language, has a lot of plugin, has a lot of other tool and framework that they born around. Three of them that you can play with are Compass, Barbon, and Suzy. Just to give you an example, Compass, it will give you a lot of mixing function that already done, ready to use, that are not yet included in Sass. Up to you to have a look. As I told you, I will leave to you a list of links that I feel are very useful. There are the links mentioned in the presentation, and there are also different links. For example, link to keep updated on the front-end area, just with one page. There are very important, if you want to learn CSS3, I suggest to use Mozilla, the developer webpage of Mozilla, where you have all the important definition, and the page I mentioned in the presentation with all the different properties, concepts, and pseudo-classes, and for each one there are examples. And of course, I let you dive in my link. Specifically, it's very important CSS3. Please have a look. I really suggest to you. You will see a lot of motivating example, and thanks I hope thanks to this presentation you will understand what they are speaking about. What is an auto prefix, why they speak about that, why it's not in this browser. Other tool more general for inspiration. And to finish, I feel personally that it's important to follow few people on Twitter, for example, that they work at MIT or in the W3C consortium, and they are, if we can say, the guru. So I want to thank you very much for your time.